This episode of Smart Poker Study is brought to you by my upcoming hand reading webinar. It'll be held on October 22nd at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Accurate hand reading allows you to make better, more positive EV choices in every hand you play. Not only is it great at the tables, but hand reading allows for better off-the-felt hand analysis. The webinar comes with additional items and some bonuses, so don't miss out. Attend the webinar and become a rock star hand reader. Visit smartpokerstudy.com/handreadingwebinar for more info and to purchase now. Hello, I'm Sky Matsuhashi, founder of SmartPokerStudy.com, the place for poker players who are always striving to be better today than they were yesterday. Poker people, in episode 97, I gave you the exact stats that I use in my steal pop-up so you can emulate it and use it in your own games to steal, and steal some more. Hey, poker people, love you for subscribing to the podcast and telling your friends, for sharing it on Twitter and Facebook, and for leaving those killer podcast reviews within your favorite podcatching app. Keep it up, y'all! So, there's almost too much to cover today in class number 3 of the Stealing Blinds Minimum Effective Dose. So, time's a-wastin', let's get it on. In class number 1, we discussed how blind stealing can improve your overall win rate, how to have a solid blind stealing mindset, and which players to target. I also got into some break-even math and gave you a great way to study your steal spots and opportunities. In class number 2, I gave you all the stats within my own steal pop-up in PokerTracker 4, and in the weekly boost video that week, I showed you exactly how to copy my pop-up for your own use. So, in class 3 this week, we'll get into some positional analysis and why your steals need to be kept to the cutoff, the button, and the small blind. I'll next discuss your stealing ranges by position. I'll talk about steal bet sizing and why bigger is better, up to a point of course. And finally, I'll discuss how you should think about stealing with limpers already in the pot, along with some opponent stats that will help you in this regards. For everybody who loves learning from videos, this week's weekly boost exclusive will show you how to filter for steal opportunities in PokerTracker 4 and what to look for while analyzing these hands. So make sure you hit the show notes page for everything I discussed today, along with screenshots and links at www.smartpokerstudy.com/pod99. While you're there, sign up for the weekly boost to get that steal filtering video that I just mentioned, as well as other great pieces of weekly exclusive poker strategy content. Okay, let's get to it. Gambate!
And now for our feature presentation.
So we'll begin today by talking a bit about position. When it comes to stealing, you should really only do so from the cutoff, the button, and the small blind. You need to remember that your steal is ultimately a bluff, so you want folds from all the remaining players. When you steal from the hijack, or even sooner, you need 4 or more players to fold, and that's really a pretty tall order. When you're stealing from the button, you only need 2 blinds to fold. That's it, nice and simple. When you want to see how often the 2 blinds fold together on average, you multiply their fold to steal stats together. So, let's say the small blind folds to steals 90% of the time, and the big blind folds 80% of the time. Then together, they fold 0.9 times 0.8, or 72% of the time. We can run this same math calculation for a steal from the hijack. We just need to multiply how often they all fold to a 2-bet open raise. Now, I wouldn't suggest that you try to do this math on the fly while you're playing. It's really not worth it. I'm just discussing it here so that you can understand how difficult it is to steal from the hijack or sooner. So, to figure out how often an opponent folds to a 2-bet, you need to consider 2 different stat numbers. The first is their 3-bet percentage, and the second is their call 2-bet percentage. So, every time someone faces an open, they can either 3-bet, they can call, or, of course, they can fold. So you just need to add their 3-bet and their call percentages together to see how often they continue versus a 2-bet open. If they 3-bet 5% of the time, and maybe they call 15% of the time, then they play 20% of the time when facing a 2-bet open raise. And if they play 20%, then they're folding the remaining 80% of the time. So that is their fold to 2-bet percentage. So let's say you open from the hijack. Let's give the cutoff a fold to 2-bet percentage of 80%. We'll say the button folds 60% of the time, the small blind 85%, and the big blind folds to a 2-bet 60% of the time. Let's multiply all of these together. you have 0.8 times 0.6 times 0.85 times 0.6 again, which gives us 24%. So all 4 players will fold to your open only 24% of the time. Seeing as how your steal is a bluff and you want folds, the hijack just isn't a good position to steal from. There's too many players to get through. And this is why we only consider stealing from the cutoff, the button, and the small blind. With less players to get through, your steal is more likely to work. Plus, when you open too early, you're more likely to face in-position callers, and that just ain't a bread-and-butter situation. You're likely at a card disadvantage, and you definitely have positional disadvantage. Now, at this point, some of you are raising your hands, and you're saying, yeah, but... And I'd have to agree with you guys. There are situations where it might be profitable to steal from the hijack, or even sooner. But that's what poker's all about. There's all these rules we set for ourselves, and often the math and logic agree with these rules. But poker is situational and player dependent. You might find yourself at a table where the 4 players to your left, maybe they're all just super tight players. This might be a good spot to steal from the hijack. Or maybe these 4 players might have some glaring post-flop weaknesses that you can take advantage of. Great! Go ahead and steal. As long as you estimate your steal as positive EV, then go ahead and make it. But I just want to say, if you choose to never steal from the hijack or sooner, and if you stick to a strictly value-oriented range, from the hijack or sooner, I wouldn't fault you for that at all. But speaking of your steal being positive EV, the range you choose to steal with has some say in this. So let's discuss the ranges you're stealing with here. In the first MED on opening theory, I gave you my ranges by position, and these ranges included value hands and stealing hands. And if you haven't picked up your own copy of my cash pre-flop ranges PDF just yet, just go to the show notes for episode 94 at www.smartpokerstudy.com/pod94 and enter your email into the box for this exclusive PDF. It'll show you the complete open, calling, and 3-betting ranges that I recommend from the early position, the cutoff, the button, and the blinds. So, to discuss your stealing range, I'm going to look at stealing from one particular position and all the range considerations that go into it. We'll talk about stealing in the cutoff. If you don't have the pre-flop ranges PDF just yet, or it's not handy at the moment and you're listening to this while you're out jogging or something, go to the show notes for this page later on and you'll see a screenshot of it there. So, the total opening range I recommend in the cutoff is 24%. This is broken down as all pocket pairs, ace-deuce suited or better, ace-8 offsuit or better, king-7 suited, king-jack off, I love that hand, queen-9 suited, and queen-jack off, that's another good one, suited gappers, 7-5 suited or better, and suited connectors 6-5 suited or better. So this is a total of 314 hands, and this is what I recommend opening within a bubble. In other words, barring any reads or table or tournament conditions, this is the range you should open from the cutoff. But of course, we don't play in a bubble. We usually have some info to go off of, and we want to use that info when we're deciding what hands to open with. And I'm sure some of you said, ace-8 off or better, why not all aces from the cutoff? Well, the reason why is I think that the 24% frequency from the cutoff makes for a very good frequency. It's not too wide and it's not too tight, and it's kind of tough for your opponents to exploit such a balanced late position range. So, to stick to the 24% idea, I had to draw the line somewhere, and ace-8 off, king-jack off, queen-jack off, king-7 suited, queen-9 suited, 7-5 suited, and 6-5 suited were all the cutoff hands for that range right there. If you wanted to change this range for yourself, great, go ahead and add those aces in, but take off some of those suited gappers or suited connectors or suited kings, whatever you want to do. Remove some hands if you want to add others. So, this 24% opening is what I'd recommend as quote-unquote standard hands to open with. So let me ask you a question. Why might we increase or decrease this range? And take a moment to answer this for yourself. Nice moment. I'm sure you came up with like 17 reasons here. And actually, I've got 12 reasons to list out. So if you came up with 17, good on you. So here are 6 reasons to increase it and steal more often from the cutoff. Reason number 1, and this isn't an all-inclusive list. These are just the 6 that I came up with right here. Reason number 1 is you have a nitty button and nitty blinds who fold a lot, so you want to steal more often. Number 2 is you've got a tight image and you think your raise will be respected. Number 3, your opponents have glaring post-flop weaknesses that you know how to take advantage of, so go ahead and do it. Reason number 4 to increase your range from the cutoff, your stealing range from the cutoff. You're the chip leader on the bubble, and you're trying to accumulate chips while all the short and medium stacks are afraid for their tourney life. Reason number 5 is you enjoy stealing, or you want to practice playing in steal spots with weaker ranges. And hey, this really is a valid reason to be stealing more often. You need those practice, or you need that practice, so go ahead and do it more often. And the final reason I came up with to increase your steal range in the cutoff is you want to create a lag image versus all the tags at the table, so that you can really sock it to them when you've got the goods and they just don't believe you. Okay, and now I've got 6 reasons to decrease your stealing frequency or your stealing range in the cutoff. So, reason number 1, the button is a loose passive calling station, and you can't bluff him off easily post-flop when he's got position on you. Just not a good situation. Reason number 2, the button or the blinds are aggro 3-betters, and you don't know how to play against such aggression. Okay, that's plausible. Reason number 3 to decrease your cutoff stealing frequency. You're uncomfortable playing in steal spots, but of course, if that's the case, you've got to start doing it to get comfortable. Maybe drop down in stakes, in order to feel more comfortable stealing more often. Reason number 4, your hand is just too crappy and you expect to get called and don't want to play that hand post-flop. A hand like 10-4 suited and Jack 3 suited and King 4 offsuit. Stuff like that. You just don't want to play it post-flop. Reason number 5 to decrease your stealing frequency. You're multi-tabling online, and maybe you're involved in other key hands right now. So you fold the marginal spot so that you have more brain matter, more brain space to concentrate on those important matters. And the final reason to decrease your range might be something like, I said you should steal with a specific hand, but maybe you've had a history of finding it difficult to play that one, so you think it's best just to fold. In that cutoff range that I gave you, I said, hey, go ahead and raise ace-8 or better. Well, maybe you've had a history of losing a ton of chips with ace-8 offsuit and ace-9 offsuit. Go ahead and fold them and open with something else that might be a little bit easier to play post-flop. Okay, so as you can see, poker is situational and player dependent, and changing some factors can lead to stealing more or tightening up and folding more. But whatever decision you make, it should be the most positive EV route. I want you to remember that folding any hand is neutral EV. You don't win and you don't lose any money. If you decide to play a hand by raising, calling, limping, shoving, overcalling, whatever you're doing it because it's positive EV and better than just folding the hand and losing nothing. And there's a great rule of thumb for stealing opportunities. When in doubt, fold. Quite simple. Alrighty, so let's get into some blind stealing bet sizing and some math involved. So we've talked about position. So you're keeping your steals to the cutoff, the button, and the small blind. Good on you, mate. We've discussed ranges. So you're constricting your stealing when it seems like doing so is negative EV, and you're opening up your stealing ranges when you believe it's positive EV to do so. Nice. I like the way you're thinking, buddy. Now, the next question is, what sizing should we use for our steals? The simple answer to this is 3 big blinds for cash games, and 2.25 to 3 big blinds for tournaments, depending on the stage of the tourney. So keep in mind that the bigger the sizing, the less callers you can expect to have in general. But you don't want to give away your hand strength with your bet sizing. I want you to consider what sizing you use in the cutoff when you're dealt these 4 different hands: pocket aces, pocket sixes, 9-8 suited, and King 7 suited. If you're like the old me, you'd probably answer something like maybe 4 big blinds with the King 7 suited, 3 big blinds with the 9-8 suited and the pocket sixes, and maybe 2.5 big blinds for the pocket aces. Or, you could even be opposite of that. Maybe you'll bet bigger with your stronger hands and less with your bluffier hands. Now, lots of opponents might not notice this change, this variance in bet sizing. But if you vary your bet sizing based on hand strength, you're giving your perceptive opponents a leg up on you. So think about your own reads on opponents. Have you ever said, geez, this guy's got a strong hand. Look at that bet sizing. Or, this guy's super weak. Look at that crummy bet sizing. I'm sure you have, and I bet you've made decisions based on this read as well. So don't let your opponents read this in your sizing. Keep it consistent between your steals and your value hands. And like I said earlier, I like the 3 big blind sizing for cash games. A 3 big blind bet needs to work 67% of the time as a bluff in cash games. And that's, of course, your bet 3 big blinds divided by the total pot, which is 4.5 big blinds for 67%. And, your opponents in the blinds often fold much more frequently than that, so it's a good sizing. And for the big blind to make a positive EV call at this sizing, he needs to have 31% equity. And that's his 2 big blind call divided by the 6.5 total pot. And lots of hands have this equity, this 31% equity versus an open range. And, the big blind is probably the most likely caller that you'll face in this situation. Most tighter buttons will fold because of the 2 players yet to act, and the small blind will often fold because he's only got a half a big blind invested, and it's an easy ditch right there. But let's look at a 4 big blind steal. That needs to work 73% of the time as a bluff. Quite a jump, but that bigger sizing will get more folds. That's good when you're stealing. But what about when you've got queens or better and ace-king? You don't really want folds there. So 4 big blinds is just too much to bet with value hands because you want guys to call, not to fold. And what about going the opposite way, 2 big blind opens? Well, the smaller sizing needs to work only 57% of the time as a bluff. But that tiny sizing will almost guarantee the big blind will call every single time, and quite often the small blind and the button as well. And making it 2 big blinds with a value hand? Forget about it. You want to see a heads-up pot with pocket aces, not a 4-way pot with 8 big blinds in the middle when you got pocket aces in the cutoff. You just don't want that. So cash games, I recommend that 3 big blind open for all of your hands. And what about that 2.25 big blinds to 3 big blind open sizing for tournaments? Well, I generally use the 3 big blind sizing in the early to mid stages and while stacks are about 25 big blinds or above. When we're near the bubble or stacks are sub 25 big blinds, that's when I start decreasing my sizing for every open, not just the steal opens. And in a full ring tournament, a 3 big blind open raise needs to work 56% of the time as a bluff when the antes are in play, and that's just the simple math is 3 divided by 5.4 total big blinds in the pot. And that's great as your nitty and your tag opponents will fold quite a bit more often to that 3 big blind bet. But when stacks get shorter, I tend to decrease my bet sizing, but I never go below 2.25 big blinds. At 2.25 big blinds, your open steal needs to work 51% as a bluff. That's pretty good. This also makes it so you lose less when one of your opponents decides to re-jam on you to steal your open, the blinds, and the antes. Whether you're playing cash games or tournaments, consistency in sizing is key. Disguise your hand strength by consistent sizing, and your opponents won't know what to put you on. So, like I mentioned at the top of the show, my hand reading webinar is coming up soon on October 22nd at 10 a.m. Pacific time. I got lots of great feedback after that last webinar on rejamming in MTTs, so it's time to do another. The all-important skill of hand reading will be covered in full detail during this 1.5-hour webinar. It's the #1 requested skill from all of you, so it's about time I hit it hard and gave you the help you're looking for. Accurate hand reading allows you to extract max value when you've got your opponent crushed. It helps you bluff your opponents off their showdown-worthy hands, and helps you to get away from those hopeless situations. And as a bonus, everyone who signs up gets a special hand-reading podcast and a training video to boot. These 3 items, the webinar, podcast, and training video together, will make you a rock star hand reader. And if you can't attend the webinar, no worries, mate. You'll receive a copy of the webinar for you to watch during your next study session. So visit www.smartpokerstudy.com/hand-reading-webinar for more info and to purchase today. Seating is limited, so don't miss out. Alrighty, back to class, poker people. The last thing I want to talk about today is stealing versus limpers. So it's not always folded around to us. It can be raised first, but we'll leave those situations for the next MED number 3 about 3 betting. And, that's when we'll get into 3-bet bluffing for value and whatever. Other than facing a raise, we're often facing one or more limpers when we're in a steal position. So what do we do in a steal position with a possible steal hand versus these lame-ass limpers, or LALs? Well, it might be time to ISO raise. An isolation raise is a raise with intent to get it heads up with one particular player. In this instance, we're making it look like we want just the limper in the pot with us. But actually, what we want is everyone to fold, so our steal nets us more than just the normal blinds and or blinds and antes. Ideally, you want to target limpers, or LALs, with a high limp fold stat. You can find this in your HUD pop-ups or through your notes and experience with the players. If you don't have this in any of your pop-ups, go ahead and add it along with the limp call and the limp fold stats. So An important consideration is that you want nitty blinds as well. With that one big blind in the pot already from the limper, the big blind now has to call, whatever sizing you make it, he has to call for a bigger pot, and that can entice a lot of the passive fish, the stations, to call in the big blind. So when you are going to steal versus a limper, you really do want to look for those nitty tag, blinds that fold a lot to steals. Alrighty, so when facing limpers, there are 4 things that you need to do. Number 1, increase your sizing to 3 big blinds plus 1 per limper. And do this for all value and steal hands. If you're consistent with this, your opponents won't be able to read into this bigger sizing. They just know that you're making it bigger because there's a limper in. The second thing you're looking for when you're stealing versus a limper is you want to look for nitty blinds and foldy limpers. You want to be reasonably sure the blinds and the limper will fold. You want to see high fold to steal stats and a high limp fold percentage. The third thing you're looking for is you want to find some post-flop weaknesses. Having a limper in the pot makes it more likely the hand will see the flop. You want to be reasonably sure you'll have position on the flop, and you want your opponents to be fit or fold, or flop or turn honest in case one of them decides to call you. And the fourth thing we look for is you need to have the chips to barrel them off their hands. So this is mainly something to consider when playing in tournaments. If the effective stacks are 15 big blinds, you're much less likely to be able to effectively barrel your opponents off on the turn or the river. Bigger stacks are required for barreling. So if you've got to fire multiple streets for your opponents, to get your opponents to fold post-flop, make sure you've got the stack sizes to work with. In cash games, normally you're at like 100 big blinds or more effective stacks. But if you're in a cash game and you're up against a limper with only 15 big blinds, well, you might not want to steal against him. He just doesn't have that much to win anyway, you know? Alrighty then. That was a ton of stuff we covered today. But before we close this puppy out, I want to talk a little bit about studying your steal spots within PokerTracker 4. So, there's a couple of filters to use in PokerTracker 4 for examining your steal opportunities. Check out the show notes for screenshots of these filters, but I'll lay them out for you right here. The first is just your basic steal opportunity. This first one is the easiest to find. It's simply under Actions and Opportunities, Pre-flop Opportunities, then right there at the top, Steal Opportunity. Turn that bad boy on and you'll be shown all the cutoff, the button, and small blind opportunities to steal in unopened pots. While going through these hands, you can look at hand strength, the players in the blinds, and the effective stack sizes to determine if this is a positive EV steal spot or not. And the second filter that I want you to use is steal and face a 3-bet. So this is a good filter to see how you reacted to a 3-bet after stealing. Go to Actions and Opportunities Preflop and turn on the attempted steal under the Preflop Raises part. Next, under Preflop Opportunities, go to the Re-Raise Opportunities section and turn on 4-bet, and in parentheses facing a 3-bet. When you run this filter, take a look to see if all the steals you made were advisable, and look to see how you responded to the 3-bet re-steal. Should you have folded, called, or maybe 4-bet re-stolen? There is one more useful filter, but you'll have to see this week's Weekly Boost exclusive to learn about it. In the video, I show you how to run the filters just mentioned, as well as what to look for in the hands that get returned through the filter. So sign up through the show notes for the Weekly Boost and get ready for some Steal Spot study help this Friday. Challenge! Here's my challenge to you for this episode. Make sure you aren't revealing your hand strength through your bet sizing. Look at all the hands you opened in the cutoff, the button, and the small blind this month. Do you vary your sizing by hand strength? Do you raise more or less for value, or more or less as bluffs? If you find that your bet sizing is telling your opponent your hand strength, resolve to correct this error. Follow the sizing I recommended today, and stick to it. Remember what I said, consistency is key. Once you do this for just a few sessions, it'll become ingrained in your game and you won't have to think about it ever again. And you won't be giving your opponents this simple way to exploit you. Now it's your turn to take action and do something positive for your poker game.
Now get it on.
Alrighty, to recap the episode, I started off by discussing why you should keep your steals to the later positions, which were cutoff, button, and small blind. The math showed you how stealing too soon is less likely to be successful with more players yet to act. I then discussed the ranges I think you should use and some of the considerations for opening or constricting these steal position ranges. Remember that ultimately your decision to steal should be based on whether you think it's a positive EV play or not, and you shouldn't doggedly stick to a range or the fact that it's folded to you in a steal position. I showed you why it's best to keep your bet sizing consistent between value and steals. It can go down in tourneys as you get further along, but you should stay consistent there as well within the blind level. I discussed also how to steal versus limpers, as well as gave you the 4 things you need to look for while doing so. And those were number 1, increase your sizing to 3 big blinds plus 1 per limper. Number 2, look for nitty blinds and foldy limpers. Number 3, find post-flop weaknesses. And 4, have the chips to barrel bluff those fools. And I capped it off with some great steal filters for PokerTracker 4. So if you're not already there, head on over to the show notes at smartpokerstudy.com/pod99 for screenshots and links to everything mentioned today, and to sign up for the weekly boost to get this week's companion video. Thank you so much for listening today. I want your feedback, so hit me with it through the show notes, or you can send an email to sky@smartpokerstudy.com. And I want those questions. The Q&As are going to continue on. So real quick, I want to read an iTunes review from one of my listeners. He titled it Extraordinary 5 stars. By Al Sen. Sky provides extraordinary poker podcasts, and I'm so lucky to have found his site. He provides critical strategy and concepts in a supportive manner, always encouraging the listener to get stronger in their play. He avoids the pitfalls of others by not demeaning players, but can provide a helpful critique. He has the perfect balance for teaching poker, knowledge and competence in his field, in addition to genuine interest in helping players excel. Poker players excel. Well, thank you very much for that review, Al. I really appreciate it. Those are some really nice words. Thank you so very much. And I love it when people say nice things. So if you want to let me know how you feel about this podcast, please leave an iTunes review. Alrighty, peeps. Be sure to come back next week for the final 4th class of this blind stealing minimum effective dose. I'm going to talk about 3-bet re-steals, a little more on post-flop play and steal spots, and some steal defense strategies, and when to consider leaving that darn table because those darn blinds won't fold to your darn steals. Darn it. Oh, and another Q&A coming at you this Friday. Word of mouth is the best advertising, so thanks much for sharing the show with other poker people. Your sharing and caring helps us grow. Until next time, study smart, play much, and make your next session the best one yet.